Over my career, I have an interesting combination of perspectives. I was chairman of a department of medicine in two U.S. med schools, which basically ran very high-end, sophisticated care systems. And really, those systems began playing around with virtual care maybe 20, 25 years ago. Included the VA hospital, and in the United States, the VA hospitals were one of the very first to recognize the advantage of virtual care, where they could send a corpsman who is a well-trained individual out to remote areas, let's say in Wisconsin, and then physicians could actually manage those patients from the head hospital in Milwaukee. That very same hospital system, the private hospital system, also began taking care of patients in intensive care units on nights and weekends in many community hospitals, because those community hospitals couldn't afford to have a pulmonary critical care specialist there 7/24 if they only had 8 critical care beds. So this was a way to provide very high quality care in even a smaller community hospital in rural Wisconsin. After those jobs, I actually moved to be dean at a medical school in California. And there, I think there was a lot of opportunities, because California in the United States was one of the very first systems to adopt basically telemedicine, a lot of remote care. And probably the big breakthrough there was the ability for physicians to bill and collect for virtual sessions. Really, in some ways, the way the U.S. health economy works had actually retarded a lot of the growth and development of virtual care. And so obviously with those backgrounds, you could see that with the COVID pandemic in the United States, they were able to move very quickly to much more virtual care, because they had those smaller experiences that were quite successful. And so, they were able to adapt very quickly. It wasn't a completely foreign idea for them. The invention of the cell phone and cell coverage completely bypassed a major structural impairment to basically communication. So now, if you go back to Egypt, and for that matter, most countries of the world, everybody's got a cell phone, everybody's got cell towers, nobody has hard lines. And in fact, they didn't actually have to spend the money to build a hardline system, because technology allowed them to leapfrog, if you will, that technology. That now is then the opportunity that is waiting for implementation of a variety of virtual activities in developing countries. And in a sense, it actually has much the same opportunities as, let's say, in the United States, but maybe driven more by manpower shortages and and technology shortages, rather than, if you will, from a financial standpoint, which is what drove a lot of the United States movement into virtual care. So, as an example, most countries have rural health centers and community health centers scattered all over their countries, but the individuals that are manning those facilities are like village health workers, or potentially a nurse or a nurse practitioner. By linking them to a central hub with a great deal more medical expertise, it again bypasses the structural problem of poor roads, difficulty traveling from country to country, large populations that are spread out over rural areas. And it allows you not only to get fairly sophisticated physician input in real time, but in some things that would never be cost effective. So, for example, somebody in a remote village in Guatemala could actually be evaluated for a kidney transplant remotely. And you could talk to the patient, and with a village health worker there, they could draw blood, they would get the various tests that are necessary to do, And that cuts down on the incredible barrier of having to travel often hours to have an appointment. You see somebody and they say, well, come back tomorrow. Well, coming back tomorrow is a major logistic problem. It's staying overnight. It costs a lot of money. So, basically, many countries of the world, what might be available in the capital city, you go 20 miles outside of town and none of those are available. And the drop off, if you will, in the quality of medical expertise is really dramatic. So there's a lot of opportunities, I think, there in direct care delivery. Now, sort of the third facet of my life, as you may know, I'm currently president of St. George's University in Grenada, West Indies, which is pretty close to in Central America, it's obviously in the Caribbean. And we're actually the largest English-speaking medical school in the world. And there, the opportunity, if you will, for implementation of virtual care came really with the COVID pandemic, because clearly having large lectures was not a very conducive, to keeping everyone safe. And we actually made the transition for the first 2 years of medical school, which is largely basic science training, entirely from in-person education to, if you will, virtual education in about 3 weeks. Now, that was only possible to do because, again, educationally, we had some little projects that use virtual care that we had began using for a variety of logistic reasons. We have, hundreds of medical students, and the island of Grenada only has 100,000 people living on the island. So for our students to get real-time clinical exposure, we had already explored the possibility of them, let's say, making rounds in some of our teaching hospitals in the United States and England remotely, allowed us to basically do things remotely. And those initial efforts obviously allowed us to roll out that type of virtual education. And now, interestingly, virtual education, even after the pandemic is under control, a lot of the lessons that we've learned as a result of that are likely to be retained in the educational program. So, for instance, if a medical student in Guatemala wanted to train in the United States, let's say as a resident, one of the big drawbacks is it'll be very difficult for that person to get a residency in the United States because they don't have any US-based experience. They could be the smartest person in the world, they could do great on standardized tests, but without US-based experience, people are going to say, well, they're not going to be able to make that transition from a hospital in Guatemala to a hospital in New York City. Well, now the possibility is that a medical student could actually do a rotation, to go on rounds, interact with the doctors and residents and nurses, et cetera, at that hospital from a virtual standpoint, and not only get to see what the US healthcare system is like in that particular hospital, but a much better interaction than just an online interview for a residency position. People would get to work with them, they get to see how they interact with their patients, et cetera. So it's opening up new possibilities that, even if we didn't have COVID, would be exciting possibilities even after the pandemic's gone. My oldest son and his wife are both clinical psychologists, and they actually run the largest counseling service in Austin, Texas. And they have, I think, 28 therapists that work for them. And when COVID hit, they actually talked to me as the infectious disease expert in the family. And I told them that I would immediately begin converting to, teletherapy, because the relatively close interaction of a therapist and their client indoors, the chair and the couch are pretty close together, usually in relatively small rooms. This is going to be a high risk activity. And, both of them are going to have to wear masks, et cetera, and stuff. And I said, I actually think you should convert entirely to teletherapy. And they had not done any teletherapy at all. And in about a month, they completely converted their practice to all teletherapy. Not only individual sessions with patients, but group sessions. And interestingly, although, there was a bit of an adjustment on the part of the patients, it has actually opened up a whole new market for them. Some individuals don't like to go to a therapist because they feel uncomfortable sitting in the waiting room. Why is this person getting counseling? Is all private. In addition, their group therapy sessions, if somebody leaves town or moves away, they have to leave the group. Now people could participate. Heck, you could even put together a group therapy session with people with similar issues all over the United States that basically do this in a virtual setting. Now, that would be an example then, even after the COVID pandemic is over, I'd predict that they'll still do a lot of teletherapy as a main part of their business, because both patients and the therapists have learned that this is a very convenient and a very effective way to continue to have therapy. And the fact that it's all personal interaction, talk therapy, if you will, lends itself extremely well to doing that. Yeah. Now, we're going to be able to do that in a lot of other fields, because we will be able to develop adjuncts, if you will, to solve problems like, well, it's great to talk to the patient, but I might want to listen to their lungs, or I might want to listen to their heart, or I might want to, take a look at their x-ray. All of those things are now possible to do remotely, so that even those barriers, I think, through the entrepreneurship and development of new technologies, are all possible. I think that we will find out 5-10 years from now that this was a logarithmic growth in virtual care driven by necessity. Well, here's the advantage, if you will, of the pandemic. I'll give you a couple examples. The accreditors for medical schools have for decades been opposed to any online education. I mean, really extremes, like they wouldn't allow you to have a satellite setting where the students listen to the lecture remotely. You had to be there in person. Any suggestion that we're going to teach medical students any part of their curriculum remotely was blocked by the accreditors, and of course that meant that we couldn't do it. It's going to be very difficult for the accreditors to argue with the fact that we've now, for almost a year, taught our first and second year medical students entirely online. And oh, by the way, our grades on standardized tests, the performance of the students is virtually identical. In fact, some things we've actually, I think, done better virtually. Now there's not going to be any substitution for actually seeing patients and doing that. That's what the last 2 years of medical school are all about. But I think it'll be very difficult for the accreditors to come back now and say, oh, well, this online education early in medical school is to be stopped, is not. No, because we now have able to generate data to show that it actually is a very effective way of teaching. The same thing is true now with virtual care. Because of COVID, a lot of people now are basically calling up their doctors and talking to them online, over the internet, et cetera. And when you think about it, if we were honest as physicians, a lot of what we could do just as easily over the phone. Why are we requiring the patient to drive all the way in, sit in the waiting room, come into that? Well, it's because of the way doctors are paid for their services. Well, now, because of the concern about the patients basically not getting appropriate medical care because of fear they're going to get COVID at the doctor's office, and for a variety of other reasons, it's now allowed that doctors can bill and collect from virtual care. I think it's going to be very difficult to go back now and say, oh, wait a minute, now that there's no COVID-19, everybody has got to, truck on down to the doctor's office to get their prescription refilled. That's crazy. It drives up the cost of healthcare. It doesn't provide any additional benefits. So I think that, again, the disaster, if you will, provides a proof of concept that we would never, probably would have taken us years to chip away at, fairly stodgy conservative rules, et cetera. And, listen, I've been a physician for 45 years. There's nothing more conservative, quite honestly, than physicians and hospitals. And I mean, it's a very conservative business. And there's a lot of innovation around exciting therapies, et cetera. But if I had told anybody 5 years ago that a medical school, the first 2 years could be taught entirely online, they would have been horrified. Oh no, you can't do that. We're doing it now. In fact, everybody's doing it now. So I think there will be those type of opportunities, and it'll be very difficult for the politicians, I think, to not respond to the facts. Because when nobody has facts, when people say, no, this will be a lot better, the skeptics can always win the day. They take a more conservative, they stall, they drag their feet, et cetera. Pretty tough. Once you've done it, it's hard to go back.